Hello, we are going to go over the general event reporting and incident reporting training today for special kids, special families. This is going to pertain to staff and host home providers and supports. This will be a slideshow. After the general event report slideshow, we will go over mistreatment, and then I will do another share screen to share with you how to actually write and submit a general event report on Therap. Topics that we're going to be discussing will be when to report an incident, how to report an incident, filling out a GER, notification and follow-up procedures. This will be specific to special kids, special families, critical incident reporting, and then provider and agency responsibility. So when to report an incident. So any new behaviors that you see in any individual in your service or that you are supporting, this would include any behaviors that are not currently being tracked on a BISSP. If they are being tracked on a BISSP and it results in, say, injury, then that would be reportable. But anything that's already being tracked on a BISSP should be tracked there and there only. Any historical behaviors that resurface. So this is going to be anything from aggressive behaviors to nighttime behaviors, anything of that sort that the individual has a history of, doing or behaving as, that would then resurface, whether it be a few months after seeing that last behavior or a few years even. So anything that resurfaces, we do want you to report. Physical and verbal aggression towards others and self. So that would include those self-injurious behaviors or property damage, as the next bullet goes over, anything like that. Injury, minor or major injury, must be reported to SKSF as an incident report. This is going to include any new or unexplained marks on the individual. So if they wake up from, sleeping one morning and they've got a bruise on their face, we do want to report that. And we don't ever want to assume what it came from. We just want to get it reported. So these marks can include, but are not limited to, bruises, scrapes, scratches, burns, etc. Unexplained mark means that a support person discovered it but was not present to see how the mark was caused. If it can be explained, then a GER should have already been submitted. Again, GER is general event report, also known as an incident report. So if it can be explained, there should have already been a report made. Obviously, your more major injuries, bone fractures, falls resulting in their head being hit, things like that clearly need to be reported. And of course, we'll go over this later in the training, but there's going to be different classifications of reports made dependent on the injury. Mistreatment needs to be reported immediately. This is going to include abuse, neglect, and exploitation, whether it be for the individuals in your care or another individual, an at-risk adult. If you feel that they're being mistreated, it is your responsibility to report that. Emergency services, when they're involved, it is considered another reportable incident. This is going to include crisis response team, police, ambulance, fire department, anything of that sort. So typically any event that requires a call to 911, that is going to be an incident report, whether there was charges pressed or if there was any action by the emergency services, that is still going to require an incident report rather. Hospital admittance, and this is, we're talking unplanned hospital admittance here. Injury or illness that requires more than simple first aid care. So anything beyond the Band-Aid or the approved as needed medications such as Neosporin, ibuprofen, things like that, that need to be handled by either an urgent care or an emergency room, those are going to be reportable. Lost or missing person, of course, the criteria for this to be considered critical or non-critical is going to be laid out in the health and safety and the service plans. Any criminal activity, whether suspected, observed, discovered, whatever, needs to be reported. Any psychiatric crisis resulting in police, ambulance, crisis response, or unplanned hospitalization. This would be where, suicidal ideations, any need for interventions beyond our scope of practice, that would need to be reported. Medication errors, this includes error in medication administration. So let's say you missed or forgot the morning dose of medication, and you discovered it a couple hours later, that will need to be reported. Whether or not there's adverse effects from the missed dose, that's going to indicate the level of the incident. But as a general rule, if there is an error in administration, it needs to be reported to us. Giving medication without proper documentation, that is a reportable incident. However, those are going to be case by case, and that's why we do, and you'll learn in our procedures, we do require calls to the on-call phone for all incidents being reported. The reason being is because sometimes, if we've gotten the documentation for a medication, and maybe we forgot to send it off to the HHPs, as long as someone has got it on file. But as HHPs, you do learn in your QMAP that you are not to give any medication without a written physician order. So that is why that is reportable. Unusual offenses by the individual. This list is short, but there are a lot that just don't, typically show up or are not historical. So we consider these unusual offenses. This is going to be your theft, problematic sexual behavior, anything that has not been reported in the service plan as something that this individual has a history of. So for individuals with developmental disabilities only, the use of any emergency control procedure or safety control procedure needs to be reported. And there are special things that need to be documented when reporting these types of procedures. And any death that occurs also needs to be reported. So you hear me talk about different classifications of incident reporting. So we do have our non-critical and our critical incident reporting. You're going to see this labeled as CIR throughout, and that does mean critical incident report. So a critical incident is an actual or alleged event that creates the risk of serious harm to the health or welfare of a client receiving Health First Colorado, which is Colorado's Medicaid program, benefits. A critical incident may endanger or negatively impact the mental and or physical well-being of a client. Critical incidents include, but again, are not limited to death, mistreatment, which of course encompasses abuse, neglect, and exploitation, injury or illness to the client. This is going to be the major injury illnesses that obviously are beyond just the urgent care. Here's some antibiotics. It's a sinus infection type thing. Damage to any of the consumer's property or theft of the consumer's property. Medication management issues. Again, critical incident reporting. If you're not sure, ask the question, because like I had explained before, medication management issues are not always going to be classified as a critical incident report. However, we do have those medication issues that will be critical. Criminal justice involvement or incarceration of a client. Missing person is a critical incident report. Unsafe housing or displacement. And then I have other in there. This could be anything from alleged sexual assault. This can be, anything that really harms them in a long-term way, whether it be their housing, their food situation, anything like that. So if in doubt, always ask the question. should this be reported as critical? But we should be able to advise you, especially with our new procedures of calling the on-call phones, when there is an incident report being submitted, those questions should be asked at that time. Typically, based on the information you give when you call the on-call phone, we're going to automatically know how to classify that incident. So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on some of the listing of types of critical incidents. So this one's going to go over death. So all client deaths must be reported immediately. The cause of death, the names of any individuals involved, location of the death, and law enforcement involvement, if applicable, should all be listed in the critical incident report. If the death is a result of a previously entered critical incident, a new separate critical incident must be entered to report the death. So, for instance, if you have a client who's hospitalized for pneumonia, you've already submitted a critical incident report for the hospital admittance and the illness, and that, say 3 days later, that client dies from the pneumonia, you will then have to submit a second incident report for the death of that client. Okay, mistreatment, again, this encompasses neglect, exploitation, and abuse. And this is mistreatment and is always classified as critical incidents. So abuse includes actions which result in bodily harm or pain. Neglect is a failure to provide care and service when a client is unable to care for him or herself. Exploitation is the deliberate misplacement or wrongful use of a client's belongings or money without the client's consent. Adult Protection Services, APS, Child Protective Services, CPS, and law enforcement mandatory reporting must be followed and noted in the critical incident report. Okay, injury or illness. An injury or illness that requires treatment beyond first aid, which includes lacerations requiring stitches or staples, fractures, dislocations, loss of limb, serious burns, skin wounds, pneumonia, urinary tract infections, etc. All of these are going to fall under that injury, illness, critical incident reporting criteria. An injury or illness requiring immediate emergency medical treatment to preserve life or limb, or any emergency medical treatment that results in admission to the hospital. So any injuries or illness that do not meet these guidelines should not be submitted as critical. Critical incident reporting, I've combined the medication errors and the property into one slide here. Damage to the consumer's property or theft. This would include deliberate damage, destruction, theft, or use of a client's belongings or money, or deliberate diversion of medications, because those medications ultimately are the consumer's property. Medication error or mismanagement. Issues with medication dosage, scheduling, timing, setup, compliance, and administration or monitoring, which results in harm or an adverse effect, which necessitates medical care. That's going to be a critical incident. The name of the medication must be listed in the critical incident report. Okay, so missing person. A person who is identified as missing by law enforcement, staff, family, caretakers, or other natural supports. A person is considered missing if they cannot be located and there is a reason to believe the person may be lost or in danger. The criteria to be met for an individual to be considered missing is person-specific and should be laid out in a health and safety plan. This information can also be found in the service plan. All providers and supports need to be trained in the risks of elopement, criteria for contacting law enforcement, and if the individual cannot be found, etc. So you may have one client who has 4 hours of alone time without check-ins. By hour 5, obviously, if you haven't heard from them, can't contact them, and you have reason to believe that they're in danger, obviously we need to start alerting the team and make sure that we're adhering and well trained in those health and safety and service plans. And we need to make sure that, we notify everyone. This would be a critical incident, especially for those at-risk adults who are considered missing. Any criminal activity. This would be any illegal activity that is allegedly committed by the waiver participant in which there is law enforcement involvement. These examples include, but are not limited to, arrests, incarceration, criminal court appearances and charges, illegal drug use, and shoplifting. Violations of probation or parole that potentially will result in the revocation of probation and/or parole. Any criminal offense that is committed by a waiver participant that results in immediate incarceration. Those will all be critical incidents. Unsafe housing and displacement. Unsafe housing is any home or living space which does not provide a safe and healthy environment. Displacement is the removal of the client from a home or living space due to natural disaster. This is going to include fire, flooding, hail damage, which we do experience quite a bit here in Colorado, and or, of course, eviction. Social environment hazards are the culture that the waiver participant lives in and the people and institutions with whom the waiver participant interacts. This would include family, roommates, facility, staff, and providers. So as I had stated before, as mandatory reporters, this is not going to be just our clients. This is something to look out for as host home providers, as supports going into the homes of other clients, other host home providers who have clients that are not ours, being vigilant and making sure that, any housing is safe for clients, any clients. Just because they're not in your care does not mean that they're not your responsibility. Any person that is coming in contact should be vigilant and ready to report any suspected, unsafe housing conditions, and that will be critical incident. Okay. Other serious issues that do not have their own category of critical incident type. This includes substance abuse, victim of a crime, suicidal ideations, self-injurious behaviors, critical service interruption. That would be an interruption in Medicaid, whether it be accidental or intentional. Sexual inappropriate behavior towards another individual and services. This falls under mandatory reporting, but is also a critical incident. And any other incident that meets the critical incident reporting criteria. Again, we will advise you of the notification level on these incident reports, and we'll inform you of whether or not they are considered critical or non-critical. Right, and here's a little just kind of a map out of a critical versus non-critical incident. So a critical is going to be the missing diabetes medication resulting in adverse side effects. Non-critical would be missed medication without side effects. So let's say we missed the medication, realized it within 45 minutes of the missed time, called the pharmacy and they said it was safe to go ahead and administer that late. We do need to report that, but it is a non-critical at that point. If an individual requires urgent care visit resulting in the diagnosis of a fractured leg, that's going to be reported as critical. However, if the individual requires urgent care visit resulting in the diagnosis of bruising and is given an as-needed pain medication, that's going to be non-critical. Seizure resulting in concussion. All seizures obviously are tracked via Therap or the program-specific tracking procedures, but if it does result in a concussion, those are critical. That is a critical incident due to the fact that a concussion can be serious to the health and well-being of the individual. If there is a seizure resulting in a few mild scratches and a bruise on their arm, this is going to be reported, but reported as non-critical. If the police are called to the home due to uncontrollable and dangerous behaviors, that's going to be a critical incident. Non-critical is going to be any show of new aggressive behaviors, no injury, no law enforcement involvement. Non-critical incident reporting procedure. For residential, this is going to be for the host home providers. The first thing that you need to do for non-critical incidents is call the on-call phone. The number is right there. It is 719-439-9261. You need to make sure that you alert them of what had happened, allow them to complete any follow-up questions at the time. Once you contacted on-call and received any instruction or advisement from them, then you can log into Therap and complete the general event report as soon as possible. Typically, the on-call staff for residential is going to advise you on a time frame for that report. So please adhere to any of those instructions. Be available for follow-up from your supervisor. This is going to happen within 24 hours. So if you have an incident that happens at 7 p.m., typically your host home supervisor is going to be following up if any additional follow-up is needed the next morning, so that they can get that general events report submitted to the team. If your report includes a doctor's appointment, we do ask that you submit all that documentation as soon as you receive it. And I will say, calling the residential on-call phone does help and aid in the time it takes for us to conduct our follow-up as well. So it is very important that you do contact that phone before submitting the event report. Okay, so critical incident reporting procedure is going to be a little bit different. As you can see, first and foremost, we want you to know is the on-call for any of our programs is not going to be your first point of contact in an emergency. We are there for support, but it is out of our scope of practice to give advice in an emergency situation. So if you feel that there is a health, safety, well-being issue at hand, the number one thing you need to do is call the proper authorities. That could be APS, CPS, 911, etc. Then once that call is made, ensure that the individual is safe. If that means waiting for the authorities to arrive and then calling the on-call phone once things have settled, that is fine. But remember that SKSF residential on-call should not be the first point of contact in an emergency situation. We do have that on-call phone manned 24 hours a day. However, there are going to be times where we are either on another call or just unable to get to it before it hits the voicemail. So it is important that you leave a voicemail. It is our policy that the on-call personnel will get back to you within 1 hour of your voicemail. Once you contacted the proper authorities, ensure the safety of the individual and contacted residential on-call, then you will need to log into Therap and complete the general event report within the time frame given to you by the on-call supervisor. Make sure that you are available for follow-up from your supervisor immediately after the event and or within that first morning, and submit all documentation as soon as you receive it. Okay, this is critical incident reporting procedure for adult services. Of course, in an emergency situation, none of our program on-call systems are equipped to advise you in emergency situations. So the first phone call that you should make will be to the proper authorities. Ensure that the individual is safe, and then contact adult services on call. That number is 719-244-2467. If on call cannot be immediately reached, then the program coordinator should be contacted. On-call staff and or program coordinator will advise you on the next steps to take after that. So we all know there's been a pandemic going on for a good amount of time now. So we do want to go over the COVID-19 response and reporting across all of our programs. So direct exposure, this needs to meet CDC and county criteria of COVID-19 should be reported as a non-critical incident for documentation purposes. This does help in identifying when exposures have been made clear to host home, support, staff, anybody. So that way, if we do end up receiving a positive test a few days down the road, we can pinpoint what our criteria is for the procedures following that exposure. If an individual is presumed to have COVID-19 or is taken to a testing site or provider for testing, this should be reported as a non-critical incident. Typically, what we've seen over the course of this COVID-19 pandemic is that, if there's an exposure, a lot of times guardians are saying, go get them tested right away. So that's typically happening in the same day. If you do get notification that there was an exposure and then immediately get them tested the same day, I do not expect 2 general event reports to be submitted. You can just document both in the same report, as these are both typically for documentation purposes. Because you are taking the individual to a provider, this is considered medical care outside of the regular first aid. So if there wasn't an exposure, but you're taking them because of symptoms, then we would need you to still, report that you had to take them in to get tested. And you will be advised on precautionary measures and whatnot to take. Any positive COVID-19 test should be reported immediately to the proper agencies and is considered a critical incident. These are the only ones that the community center boards are currently tracking as critical incidents. Of course, as things have proven to change very quickly, if anything changes in that regard, we will update you via email or per program policy for communication. So direct exposure response, each agency will follow their own procedures for quarantine. And this is also going to be program specific across special kids, special families. For residential and for host home providers, they will be asked to monitor all individuals in the same home for symptoms, and temperatures will be taken and recorded in the daily logs daily for 14 days or until the exposed individual has a negative test. Symptoms of COVID-19 response. Tracking and documentation of symptoms and temperatures will begin immediately for all individuals in the home. No individual on the DD waiver can be forced to get tested. They are adults. So if an adult, refuses the test, we do have to be courteous of that decision and support them in the best way that we can, which means typically, they're staying away from others in the home, staying in their room, wearing masks when they're in common areas, things like that. Advisement and support of safe practices. This includes social distancing, wearing a mask in the home, washing hands, things like that will be put into place based on symptoms of COVID-19. And again, symptoms of COVID-19, as we know, don't always equal positive COVID-19. However, those precautions will be in place until we know for sure that it's negative or positive. COVID-19 positive response, immediate reporting to the county. The individual who has tested positive will be asked to isolate away from housemates for 10 days minimum. And I say minimum because per last county advisement, it was with a positive test, it was 10 days of isolation unless at the end of that 10 days they were still experiencing symptoms. Then they would need to continue isolation until those symptoms subsided for 72 hours. All individuals and host home providers in the home will be asked to quarantine, which just means staying home, not going out into the community. We don't want to risk spreading the COVID-19. Supports from the agency will be implemented. This means groceries, medications, errands, etc. We have a all hands on deck approach here at residential as far as any of the individuals or their support or in-home supports testing positive, whatever you all need, we are here. But you have to understand that the needs need to be communicated with us clearly so that we know how to respond and support. All right, so notification levels. You've heard me say it probably 100 times now that, you'll be advised on how to classify the general event reports. So in Therap, the notification levels, There's 3 of them, so it goes low, medium, high. Your high notification level GERS are going to be those critical incidents. So emergency room visits, hospital admission, mistreatment, police involvement, elopement, etc. Anything that poses an immediate risk to life or safety. Then we're going to have medium. Medium is going to include those minor injuries, urgent care visits, medication errors with noted side effects, and unexplained marks, etc. With the medication errors, I do want to note that there are certain circumstances where those side effects would increase the notification level to high. But again, that is something that we would advise on when you call the on-call phone and let us know what's going on. All right, so low notification level is going to be self-injurious behaviors not tracked on a BISSP, behaviors, property destruction, and anything not following into the above 2 categories. And I will say most general event reports will be classified as low. Okay, so the general event report notification procedure for residential. A lot of this might be just repeating what I said above, but it is worth repeating. So under the notification section in Therap, which I'll show you when we do the training on how to do a GER, you want to check the box next to the notified field. The form will extend to let users enter information on who has been notified regarding the incident. As host home providers, you are only responsible for notifying the SKSF on-call phone. Note who you spoke with, because that will go in your notifications box on Therap. And in emergency situations, the guardian will be notified. HHPs can notify guardians, and typically I feel like they do. However, once you call the on-call phone, that on-call staff is going to reach out to the guardian as well. And then, of course, special kids reports to all other parties. So this is going to include the community center boards, the day program, if you're reporting for residential, and vice versa. Any guardian outside that we're not able to get a hold of, guardian ad litem's, advocates, nurses, behavioralists, whoever is on that notification list, we will report to those parties for you. If you are reporting mistreatment, abuse, neglect, or exploitation, you will be instructed by the SKSF staff person on call what next steps should be taken. Any calls to law enforcement will need to be documented with a call or case number. So if you weren't the one to call 911, let's say it was the individual called 911, police responded, but you didn't get the call number because obviously you weren't the one who initiated the call, then before submitting the general event report, you will need to call the non-emergency line for the police department and request that call number so that you can include it with your report. Okay. Notification procedure for adult services. Kind of starts out the same under the notification section. Make sure that you are checking the box next to the notified field. The form will then extend to let you enter information on who has been notified regarding the incident. As staff, you are responsible for reporting all incidents to on-call staff and your program coordinator immediately. The on-call staff and or your program coordinator will give you direction for proper follow-up and notification measures. If you are reporting mistreatment, this includes an abuse, neglect, exploitation, you will be instructed by the staff person, whether it be the on-call staff or the program coordinator, on how to proceed and what next steps should be taken. Any calls to law enforcement, again, will need to be documented with a call or case number. Okay. General event reporting follow-up will be conducted by your assigned host home supervisor, or your program coordinator will let you know who needs to conduct the follow-up for adult services. SKSF is required by the state to conduct follow-up and submit the general event report to the CCB or Community Center Board no later than 24 hours after the incident. So this is all encompassing for critical incidents as well. And actually with critical incidents, this gets a little bit even more important. In order for the CCBs to be able to do their jobs, SKSF has to do their jobs. Therefore, we need you as host home providers and supports to be immediate in your action as far as reporting those critical incidents, especially. It is required that all incident reports get submitted within 24 hours. But when it comes to critical incidents, we have to, obtain the report, do our own follow-up, submit it to the CCB, and, conclude the CCB's follow-up within that 24-hour time frame so that they can report it then to state. Typically, follow-up will be conducted via phone call or SCOM and Therap. Of course, advisement on those more specific things should come from your program coordinators and directors. Reporters must be immediately available within the next business day for follow-up. Follow-up can include questions regarding the reported event, requests for documentation, requests for witness contact information if you did not already include it in the GER, proof of stated corrective actions, information about the individual's current state or well-being, etc. Okay. And here I'm going to go over just kind of a quick and brief kind of what agency responsibilities are, what provider responsibilities are, and then kind of where we meet in the middle and we have a responsibility as far as both of us, where those responsibilities line up. So as providers, when you have a general event report, whether it be serious, critical, not critical, whatever the case, there is always going to be a responsibility to be had as far as the individual is concerned. So providers, of course, that number one responsibility is going to be the individuals under your care. Clear and honest communication with the agency and program. That entails always calling the on-call phone first, then submitting the GER, updating us with information that might be forthcoming as soon as you get it, things of that sort. Reporting incidents as quickly as possible with all available information. One thing I do want to point out is as providers, as staff, as supports, we want to make sure that you know that just because you feel like you have half information does not mean you cannot submit a general event report or an incident report. That just means that there's going to be more information gathering during the follow-up, but we do need the actual event to be reported. I think that's where a lot of people get confused. You might have a call into the doctor, or maybe, that you saw urgent care and they said to follow up with the PCP. We don't wait for those follow-ups. The event's already occurred. That follow-up will come later. So make sure that you are reporting incidents and events immediately. Uploading all medical documentation into Therap within 24 hours of care. And be available for follow-up that may be requested and fulfill any requests as soon as possible. So this enables us to be able to uphold our agency and program responsibilities. So our agency and program responsibilities include providing supports for individuals receiving services from us, ensuring that least restrictive actions were taken during the event, clear and honest communication with providers. Of course, there are circumstances where information sharing is not going to be able to happen. That's going to be with APS reports, things like that. So, and having your understanding on that. But for the most part, we should be able to clearly and honestly communicate measures and things that need to happen moving forward that are in the best interests of the individual. Any retraining for providers as we see necessary based on the event report. Providing respite. There are times where these events can be stressful on both the individual and on the provider. And having a safe, calm, non-stressed environment is best for all parties involved. So if you feel like after, say, a critical incident or something that, respite is needed, communicate that with us and we will make sure that that happens. our responsibility is also reporting incidents to the community center boards within 24 hours and providing all follow-up documentation to the CCBs within 30 days. Typically, that 30-day rule only applies if there was a doctor's appointment involved, or we're awaiting official diagnosis from a specialist, from a follow-up from a specialist or something like that. But for the most part, we are going to ask for that documentation rather quickly. So as far as both provider and agency are concerned, we both have a responsibility for documentation, communication, and support to the individual throughout any incident. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can go over mistreatment. Once we go over mistreatment, then we will go into Therap, and we will go over how to write a GER. So this training here, these slides will go over abuse, neglect, exploitation, caretaker responsibility, and mandatory reporting guidelines. So to start, we're going to define an at-risk adult. This is an individual 18 years of age or older who is susceptible to mistreatment because he or she is unable to perform or obtain services necessary for his or her health, safety, or welfare. This individual lacks sufficient understanding or capacity to make or communicate responsible decisions concerning his or her person or affairs. Persons are not considered at risk solely because of age and/or disability. Caretaker means a person who is responsible for the care of a person with an intellectual and developmental disability as a result of a family or legal relationship, has assumed responsibility for the care of a person with an intellectual and developmental disability, or is paid to provide care, services, or oversight of services to a person with an intellectual and developmental disability. Family caregiver means a family member of the person with an intellectual and developmental disability who provides care to the person with an intellectual and developmental disability in the family home, who meets the requirements for a qualified family caregiver as established by rule of the state board, and who is working through a program-approved service agency as established by rule of the state board. Respite care provider. Respite care provider means a facility or agency that meets all applicable state and federal requirements and is state certified to provide respite care services. Respite care services means services of a short-term nature provided to a client in the home or in a facility approved by the State Department in order to temporarily relieve the family or other home providers from the care and maintenance of such client, including room and board, maintenance, personal care, and other related services. All right, so we're going to take a look at abuse. So abuse is defined as any of the following acts or omissions committed against a person with an intellectual and developmental disability. First, it's the non-accidental infliction of physical pain or injury as demonstrated by, but not limited to, substantial or multiple skin bruising, bleeding, malnutrition, dehydration, burns, bone fractures, poisoning, subdural hematomas, soft tissue swelling, or suffocation. Confinement or restraint that is unreasonable under generally accepted caretaker standards, or subjection to sexual conduct or contact classified as a crime under the Colorado Criminal Code, Title 18. Abuse comes in more than just one form. Of course, we all know that. You can have verbal abuse, emotional, physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. All forms should be reported as mistreatment. Okay. And I've given some examples below. Just take a moment, look over those. Okay. And some of these do have multiple answers, as I'm sure some of you are aware, most of you are aware. So we'll read over those. So the employee or contractor slapped the hands of the individual when their hair was pulled. So let's say you have an individual who's having a behavior and goes straight for your hair. So we could classify this as physical abuse, probably the most evident one, since typically slapping the hands of an individual is probably not something that we would use as a go-to or ever really. Typically, if an individual has a history of hair pulling, we would stay calm and try to verbally redirect them to get them to let go. And if they have a strong history of it, they're going to lay out an intervention plan for these instances that would not put the person at risk. So slapping their hands, obviously, you're hitting that individual, and that should not be done. Refusing to give the individual dinner because they took a bag of chips from the pantry in the morning. So this is going to fall under emotional and psychological mostly, because this is considered punishment, which as adults, they have the right to take a bag of chips. They might be hungry, craving chips. I know I have my times at 5:30 before dinner when I'm wanting my Oreos, and I have every right to go into my pantry and grab those Oreos. I don't get punished for it. Nobody withholds my dinner. Those are my choices and my consequences if I can't finish my dinner. Punishing the individual for breaking a mirror by taking away their iPad. So this is very much going to be that psychological, emotional abuse. Yelling at the individual for not cooperating with cleaning their room. This is going to fall under that verbal abuse, probably on the erring on emotional and psychological as well. Blocking the person's wheelchair so they can't maneuver around the area. Now remember, doing this is considered a restraint, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are not using unnecessary restraint. So this could be considered physical, psychological, verbal, emotional, depending on how the situation. It's kind of a vague scenario, but if you're just locking the person's wheelchair, that is going to take a toll on them, probably more so emotionally and psychologically than anything. Telling the person that they are fat while having them look in the mirror. So that's going to be your verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse. So we're going to go on to caretaker neglect. Caretaker neglect is defined as neglect that occurs when adequate food, clothing, shelter, psychological care, physical care, medical care, habilitation, supervision, or other treatment necessary for the health and safety of a person is not secured or is not provided by the caretaker in a timely manner and with a degree of care that a reasonable person in the same situation would exercise. A caretaker knowingly uses harassment, undue influence, or intimidation to create a hostile or fearful environment. The withholding, withdrawing, or refusing of any medication, any medical procedure or device, or any treatment. Please note that any medication or medical procedure or device in accordance with any valid medical directive or order, or as described in a palliative plan of care shall not be deemed caretaker neglect. So examples of caretaker neglect, let's say your individual fell in the bathroom after taking a shower. They complained of their hip hurting, but you didn't evaluate the person for injuries, nor did you seek medical attention for them. That is caretaker neglect. The employee or contractor did not follow the supervision level, which would be line of sight, required during meal times. The person ate too fast and ended up choking. That is neglect. Any person Taking responsibility and support or care for an individual with disabilities needs to be well trained on their service plan and know how to adhere to, levels of supervision and whatnot. According to the mobility and transfer protocol, the person utilizes a gait belt. The employer contractor chose not to use it and the person fell. All right, so the employer contractor left the person in the vehicle while they went into Safeway to purchase milk. And the employer contractor does not provide proper daily assistance for toileting supports. And of course, we all know that not providing, proper daily assistance for this can cause skin breakdown, which can cause illness and infection and a whole slew of other issues. So staying vigilant, especially as, day program workers and whatnot, having individuals come into your care from host home settings, obviously being vigilant and knowing what to look for in those cases is important. All right, so exploitation. All right, so exploitation means an act or omission committed by a person who uses deception, harassment, intimidation, or undue influence to permanently or temporarily deprive a person with an intellectual and developmental disability of the use, benefit, or possession of anything of value. They employs the service of a third party for the profit or advantage of the person or another person to the detriment of the person with an intellectual and developmental disability. Forces, compels, coerces, or entices a person with an intellectual and developmental disability to perform services for the profit or advantage of the person or another person against the will of the person with an intellectual and developmental disability, or misuses the property of a person with an intellectual and developmental disability in a manner that adversely affects the person with an intellectual and developmental disability's ability to receive healthcare or healthcare benefits or to pay bills for basic needs or obligation. Examples include telling the individual you can take him to lunch only if he or she treats, coercing the individual to wash your car because they enjoy doing it and can get work experience, using the individual's funds to pay your cable bill. Theft is a separate criminal statute. All thefts against an at-risk person are felonies. It must have an element or portion of the offense committed in the presence of the victim or defendant was in a position of trust to the victim or knew the victim was an at-risk person. Note, even if the property is replaced after the act of theft has been committed, it is still a crime. Moral of the story, don't steal. All right, so now we're going to get down to caretaker responsibility. As employees or contractors, we are all caretakers. All of us share in the responsibility to our clients and to our community. Communicate with the entire team even when everything is fine. Follow all protocols and procedures per agency guidelines, and report anything suspicious no matter your relationship to the individual. Which brings us to mandatory reporting. Mandatory reporters who learn about, witness, or suspects that an at-risk elder or at-risk adult is being or has been abused, neglected, or exploited by a caretaker must report suspected cases to law enforcement within 24 hours. When reporting suspected mistreatment, your first step is to call the police department non-emergency line. And this is going to depend on which jurisdiction you're in, whether it be county, county sheriff, city police, pertaining to the city that you live in, whatever, or where the incident happened. It's going to be specific to that jurisdiction. Document the name of the dispatcher that you spoke with, the call number, which should be provided by dispatch, and the time of your call. Next will be a call to APS to make a separate report with them immediately after making the report to law enforcement. Document the name of the APS representative you spoke with, the report number, and the time of your call. Follow all instructions given by APS and cooperate with all requests. And the most important thing when reporting to APS is if you don't know, you don't know. Don't make things up. Just give them the facts and what you have from your perspective. We can't guess when we're making these reports. And then an incident report will need to be filled with all information documented from above. So the names, numbers, times, all that. Please keep in mind that it is not your job to prove anything, but it is your responsibility to report any concerns that you have. Identifying an at-risk adult. An at-risk elder is any person who is 70 years of age or older. An at-risk adult with an intellectual developmental disability is a person who is 18 years of age or older, who has an onset of an intellectual and developmental disability before the person is 22 years old. An adult with an IQ of 70 or below and or has significant limitations in the ability to socialize, provide self-care, or communicate. Individuals with developmental disabilities include autism, spectrum disorder, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, developmental delays, Down syndrome, and other disorders. Okay, so that we'll continue to our mandatory reporting. So mandatory reporters, whether they be paid or unpaid, include staff, consultants, or independent contractors of service agencies for persons with IDD. Staff or consultants for a licensed or unlicensed, certified or uncertified care facility, agency, home, or governing board, including but not limited to long-term care facilities, home care agencies, or home health providers. Staff of or consultants for a home care placement agency, staff of community-centered boards, persons performing case management or assistant services, staff of county departments of human or social services, staff of contracted providers of area agencies on aging, except the long-term care ombudsman, employees, contractors, and volunteers that provide transportation services, court-appointed guardians and conservators. Keep in mind that there is no consequence for making a report in good faith. Willful violation of the mandatory reporting requirements is considered a Class 3 misdemeanor. Failure to report suspected or known mistreatment or willfully unknowingly filing a report is a Class 3 misdemeanor. It can result in a fine of up to $750 or 6 months in jail, or both. Note, you may disclose protected health information to law enforcement when you reasonably believe the individual is a victim of abuse, neglect, domestic violence, or exploitation. There is no conflict between HIPAA and Colorado law. All right. Mandatory reporter training is required for all SKSF providers, contractors, supports, and staff. If you have not taken this training, please contact Jenny Stallnaker. She is the Director of Residential Services. Her number is 719-203-3430, and she can get you set up to take that mandatory reporting class. And all of the information for this training was sourced from the below document. And if you have any questions on either of these training slides, you can contact me via email with questions. My email is vcollins@sksfcolorado.org. I will also place that in the comments of this video. You can also reach me at 719-203-3435. All right, and now we get to the fun part. We're gonna make a GER. All right, give me a moment here. Okay, I've got Therap up here on my test account. All right. So this is what your guys' Therap home screen should look like. We're going to go to individual, and in order to initiate a general events report, we're going to click on the new button. If you have more than one client, they're going to show up here. Make sure that you are clicking on the appropriate name. All right, so a couple of important things. I know this screen looks simple enough, but we find a lot of mistakes in this first screen. So event date is not always going to be the date that you are reporting it, unfortunately. So let's say you had an incident happen at 11:50 p.m. and you don't get a chance to sit down and write the GER until, let's say, 8 o'clock the next morning, because 11:50 is way past my bedtime. I don't know about y'all. So when you open it up at 8 o'clock in the morning the next morning, it's going to default to the current date. So for the sake of this presentation, let's say that this event happened yesterday. Okay, make sure that this date is correct. It needs to be the date that the event happened. Then the report date will be today. Okay, reported by, this is my name for the time being. And since I am playing the host home role, I am going to say I'm a contractor. That is going to be your relationship for all you host home providers out there. For anybody else, there's other options such as staff, which would be if I was reporting something that I had witnessed in a residential setting while doing a home visit, I would put myself as staff. Day program, that's going to be staff. If the individual is getting on and reporting something, they're the individual. Let's say my individual went and visited family and they're like, oh, heck no, what the heck is going on? Or there was a behavior they want to report. Right here, they have the family. If you choose other, they're going to ask you to define it. So I'm the contractor now. Okay, so we're going to do injury because it's I have a lot of fun with injury because of the pictures they include. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So let's do a critical incident today. So we're going to do high because I've called the on-call phone. I reported that I took my individual to the emergency room because they decided they were going to climb a tree and they fell out of said tree. After that, they couldn't walk. Walked them into the ER, called the on-call phone, told them what was going on. And then I had to call them back and tell them that we've got a broken leg and a broken arm. So 2 separate injuries there. Keep that in mind. That's going to be important here in a second. So we're going to put home in here. Okay, so we're going to, typically if you're putting that it happened at home, it's going to auto-populate your address as the host home provider. Okay. Make sure you do US of A. We're going to do best city 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make sure you put a phone number in here. I'm going to go ahead and put mine in. Oh, maybe not. I'll put mine in. It's going to flag me for the dots. That's a really bad habit from my reporter days. Okay. That allows whoever's reviewing the report to easily access your phone number. So this is important. A lot of people feel like this is where I want all the information. This is not where I want all the information. This is where I want the information leading up to the incident. So if the incident is a behavior, we want to know what could have possibly triggered the behavior. So what happened in the 10, 15 minutes leading up to that, or what happened in the few seconds leading up to the behavior? Did you tell them that you were out of something, or they couldn't go outside because it was snowing, or what happened leading up to that behavior? Because the behavior is the incident, and we'll discuss that later in our summary. But here is describe what happened before the event. So let's just say we've got a broken arm, broken leg now. So what happened leading up to the event is the individual. So his name is Tess because that's, you know, really original. Tess became upset because his favorite TV show ended, and then stormed outside. Okay, that's leading up to the event. It can be as simple as that, or maybe there is a paragraph to write me for the antecedents. All right, so just for the sake of showing you guys these, so if you put yes on any of these, it's going to extend and ask you for types. Okay, so abuse, yes, there's types of abuse, so I'm going to click no for the sake of time. Was there neglect expected and what kind? Okay, and look, I mean, we've got neglect by questionable clinical practice, neglect by a parent or guardian. If you click other, again, it's going to ask you to specify. I'm going to put no on this one. Was there exploitation suspected? Again, it's going to ask you what kind. Okay, so once we've got all these fields filled out, make sure they're correct and hit your next button. All right. So time of injury, let's do a, I don't even know. I don't know why I'm so indecisive on this. Let's do 10 p.m. just for fun. Okay. And we're going to say we observed it because if they're upset and they stormed out the back door to go climb a tree, we're probably seeing that. Okay. So this is the specific area. So you've already said that it's at home. So this happened outdoors because there's not, well, I mean, unless if you have a tree in your house, you're awesome and I want to come meet you. So what type? Type is going to be injury type. Okay. So we are going to say fracture. Okay. The cause. Let's see here. And even though I've done this training a lot, I still don't have all of these subcategories memorized. So make sure that you're going through all of them so that you know. So this is going to be a fall because they fell out of a tree. Severity. We're going to put severe because it did require hospital or ER. So even if there's not an asterisk, we want you to try to put the information in. It's okay if you don't have it, but the more information we have when we submit these, the better off we are. So I'm going to assume with broken leg, we've probably got some multicolored stuff going on, probably some black, blue, red. Probably not fun. For size, we're not really going to be able to speak on that because of the fact that it is a break, but I'll show you in a minute. We can put multiple events in one. So if there is bruising and scratches, then we would go back and do another report until we've covered all of the injuries. Okay. So let's do for the right arm. And we can do left leg. I don't know. I just feel like being opposite today. Okay. Where are you, left leg? Actually, let's use this. This is what I wanted. This is why I love doing injury training. So we've got, let's go to the back. I don't even know what bones are back. Am I just, let's see here. So you got all kinds of options here. So left leg, we have a right arm, left leg. Okay, submit that. And the cool thing about that is I can actually pull, once we finalize the report, I can pull it with that whole body diagram and submit it to the CCB as is. All right, so let's go ER hospital for treatment by, what time did we say the injury happened at 10 p.m.? And we're gonna say we obtained treatment by 11 p.m. And that's gonna be on yesterday's, okay? So injury photos, Keep in mind, it's okay to add injury photos for documentation purposes, but make sure that the integrity of the individual is being reserved. So we don't want any gruesome photos that might be embarrassing or hurtful. If you're taking photos of the injury, you should be taking photos of only the injury. So this is where we're going to give the entire summary of what happened after our individual stormed out angry about his TV show ending. So once Test got into the backyard, he insisted that he was going to climb the tree and never come down. Test got up the tree to the nearest branch and then fell out of the tree. I'm going to put I because I am the one reporting and I already know who's reporting, so you can use that. I ran over to Test to see if he was okay, and he was screaming out in pain. I brought Test some ice and he stopped screaming. But when we tried to go back inside, he said his arm hurt really bad and he could not walk. I immediately called for help from my spouse, and we carried Test to the car and drove to the ER. The ER took x-rays and confirmed that Test has a broken leg and arm, consistent with a fall out of a tree. Okay, so there we got our summary. Some are going to be long, some are going to be short, straight to the point, but there's no such thing as too much information for me. It alleviates a lot of phone calls and a lot of follow-up questions. All right, so we're going to hit next. All right, so this is where we can add another report. Remember, we were talking about adding the bruises and the scratches, because obviously if you're falling out of a tree and you're breaking 2 bones, you've got some bruises, scratches. They need to be reported too. So we're going to put another injury in. So what I did here is clicked add another event, injury, submit. Okay. Time of injury is going to be consistent with what we had before because it all happened at the same time. We observed it. This was outdoors. Again, we're going with the same location. If you were to have a fall resulting in bruises and scratches, and then y'all went to the park and you had another incident and it wasn't at home, then we need 2 incidents. But for the sake of this one, we're going to do everything happened when he fell out of the tree. So this one's going to be, we can say abrasion, fall, the severity. This one's minor because obviously we could probably help him with the scratches and bruises at home. We're going to say red for this one. Length, they ask for centimeters. I'm not one to pull out a measuring tape. So in your summary, if you want to go down here, because it is going to ask for a separate summary, you can put, like I advise my providers, you can compare it to tennis ball size. It's the size of my thumb. It's the size of a tennis ball. Anything that would give us a good idea of what the size is. Unless you want to pull out the measuring tape and actually measure, that's on you. Either way, as long as I have something to indicate the size of each. So obviously we've got right arm abrasion, and let's go back to the body diagram and get more specific. So we've got bruise on his bottom. Okay, we got a bruise on his leg, and his knee. Oh, can't have more than 3 parts. Well, there you go. Let's take off the hip. So right arm, shin left. We'll say his shoulder. Okay. Submit. Okay. Treatment by, this is still going to be ER hospital because chances are you're not going to stop to take, unless he's bleeding, you're not going to stop to take care of the simple abrasions and stuff. You're more concerned about the more emergent stuff. So it's okay if we have minor and first aid and then ER hospital. They're going to clean them up. They're going to get that taken care of, just so long as we know who rendered that care. All right, so treatment was had within an hour. This is not different, so we don't need to put a treatment date. And again, injury photo, same things apply. So test fell out of a tree during an episode. He was upset. Fall resulted in broken arm and leg. And then we can just put something like the abrasions that appeared on his shoulder was about the size of, we'll say not a tennis ball. Let's say a golf ball. The abrasion on his arm was the size of 2 tennis balls. And the abrasion on his leg was visible. I'll just say the abrasion was visible all the way up the bottom of his leg. Okay. And then here you can put see, attached images or whatever if you want more information. Obviously, the better for the sake of time. I'm not going to get super detailed with the story. So we hit next. So it's going to show up as 2 different injuries. We've got everything documented, both breaks, all the abrasions. We're good to go. Okay, we're going to hit next. So the CCBs fill out state forms, so we do not need to put one in. If you do, great, but we do not require it. So just push next. Corrective actions taken. Rendered simple first aid on the scene. And I realized that would not be enough. I took test to the ER immediately for treatment. All right. Now, typically plan of future corrections. Obviously, corrective actions taken, that's what you took to ensure health, safety, well-being. Plan of future corrective actions. This is going to be anything to prevent that person from climbing the tree, from becoming upset. Maybe look into a plan to have pre-recorded episodes of his favorite show, if that's what caused this. So that's what we're going to say. Ready, so he does not become upset and is able to enjoy his show for as long as he would like. If test becomes That in the future, we will utilize verbal redirection, positive reinforcement to try to deter him from harm or risk. Okay. Easy peasy. Here's that notified button I've been talking so much about. We're going to click it. I'm going to go down here. So you went ahead and called the on-call phone. So we're going to put SKSF on call. All right. You're going to say you talked to Daisy. Okay. But of course you called her on the 21st. You're reporting it today. So make sure that that date is correct. And then just look in your cell phone and find out when you called. We're going to say that it was at 11:05. It was after you got to the ER to let her know that you had to take test in. And obviously not AM, but PM. Okay. Method of notification was phone call. All right. So then you're going to preview. And this is going to give you all of your injury reports. All of your summaries, everything is going to be here. And this is your last and final chance to edit where you need to edit, because once you submit, it is submitted. And then it's going to ask you if you're sure you want to continue without state data, and your answer will always be yes. All right. So you can send this via SCOM. You can print it out for your records. So this is going to be your temporary PDF, and that you can download it. So, all right. Again, any questions that you may have, please feel free to email me. Like I said, I'll put my email address and phone number in the comments box so that you can utilize those. Once you've taken the test, make sure to email, or taken the training rather, make sure you email so that we can send you out the online test to take. And we will put a deadline on that test. So once you email us to let us know, make sure that you're watching your emails for a response and directions. If you need help or clarification in any areas, we can help you. If you want a copy of these slides, please let me know and I can get those out to you as well. Thanks so much and have a great day.